Muri yeZimbabwe kusangana kwatiri kuita zvakare ipo pano paZim News update apo patinoda kupa mafirst hand update anonga ari kuitika munyika yedu yeZimbabwe. So ndiri kuuya ndakati kavheyi maupdates akati wandei pasame video sekutaura kwatiri kuita muri yeZimbabwe. Ndofunga takambozvaisa marimwe zuro pano kutoti kune another plot yekuti VP Chiwenga vange vachipfuudzwa sezvo zvetiri kuona kuti vazamwa zvendosaka muri kuona nowadays makada kucherechedza muna muitwa maspeech mumusangano webato reZANU-PF mvura dzinouya but iwo vanofamba nazvibhodhoro think sort of like maflaski tudiki so tuiri tweblack twavanonga inatwo pamberi pavo zvokuti mvura inongosvika vongogadzika havabate mvura iyoyo because vari kuziva kuti vane vavengi vakati wandei mubato reZANU-PF vasiri kuda kuti vange vachirarama. Mhuri yeZimbabwe tiri kuona panapa panyorwa futi leta yanyorwa vanhu vada kuassassinatwa vakawanda but tiri kuona kuti VP Chiwenga vari involved futi because vada kutambwa seyakatambwa vice president wekuMalawi uye akaassassinaterwa muhelicopter mhuri yeZimbabwe. Zvisinei akaassassinaterwa munhu mahara because iye akabva angojiwa futi election yacho mhuri yeZimbabwe but angatofudza munhu kudhara chinova chiri cho chiratidzo chinoratidza kuti zvinhu zvinomira zvakanaka. So tichipinda futi muna uwadzana Jacob Ngarivume Jacob Ngarivume atori pama1 mhuri yeZimbabwe atori pamakwikwi chacho because tiri kuona kuti imba yejuraho yake yakanyorwa juraho rake rakanyorwa kunzi unofira mahara rekedzei tiende kujuraho rake munyase kurizvionera mhuri yeZimbabwe kutoti rakanyorwa kunzi unofira mahara. Tichionawo futi ma-ex-combatants wakafanana naHenry Muchena vari kuramba kutoti no hakuna zvinhu zvakadaro. Tiri kuona imba yaJacob Ngarivume iyi iri kunyorwa majurahos nered tofunga tiri kuona pari kunyorwa kiu chichi chimwe munofira mahara unofira mahara chichi chimwe jurahos ari kunyorwa ipomba paJacob Ngarivume. So tiri kuona pana pakanyorwa kunzi gunmen traveling in a grey Toyota Fortuner GD6 wrote this threatening messages to the walls of the home of Zimbabwean political activist and a spokesperson for the newly formed Sungano Yevanhu Jacob Ngarivume. Sungano Yevanhu is a broad-based pressure group campaigning against the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3 which extend President Leaked Mnangagwa tenure by an additional 2 years, effectively prolong his stay in office. The law also extended the presidential term from 5 to 7 years and removes direct election of the president by the people. Ngarivume has previously been arrested and jailed 3 times by the Mnangagwa regime without ever being convicted of an offense. Tiri kuona that vanhu vari kuti hurumende yava Mugabe yaive nani because tiri kuona kuti ana hupo ching'ono vanga vangorowo majournalist but vanobvira vambosungwa nguva dzana President Robert Mugabe. Takada kutarisa those hurumende Mugabe yange isina kana dhiri yange isingatombotyisidzani zvakuitika ezvinezvo mhuri yeZimbabwe because tiri kuona kuti zvinhu hazvina kumira zvakanaka. So tiri kuona panapa pakanyorwa kunzi last week I received a disturbing parcel at my home containing dog. Tiri kuona panapa ndo zvakaitwa futi wanyatsimba mutota haminoti vanonga vachimboreve mhuri yeZimbabwe kana vachiendesa parcel inenge ine tsvina yembwa ndo zvakaitwa futi wanyatsimba mutota haminoti pakune zvine chirevo kwavari ivo but tiri kuona kuti Jacob Ngarivume ari kutotaura kuti last week ndo zvandakaitiwo zvokuti ndakareceiva that uyu ine tsvina yembwa. So tiri kuona panapa isungano yevanhu iri kutaura kuti temu munhu mutapa is in panic and very panic. Tiri kuona surely even tiri kuona panapa temu munhu mutapa ndi President Leaked Mnangagwa vari kutaura because tiri kuona kuti vari kuzviti ndini original munhu mutapa chaichai ndimambo Timothy ndvari kuzviti ndini mambo munhu mutapa but tiri kuona kuti vakatombosungirwa nhauwa idzodzo dzekuti iwe uri kuzviti uri munhu mutapa sei. Tiri kuona that mapurisa anenge mutamba iri chimwe mutamba inonzi ihama yaPresident Leaked Mnangagwa. So tiri kuona pane nhauwa iri kuzimu ai kunoku nhauwa yemagoridhe mhuri yeZimbabwe regedzei tidzike nayo tira kuti timuinge muchinzwa chirongwa chetinacho pano. So tiri kuona panapa inhauwa iyi iri apa hatizokwanisi kuti tinge tichirwa that record because tozorwa nemacopyright but nhauwa yacho iri apa. Tiri kuona panapa orisa kukanya tagwirei ED is 150 million gold dispatcher expand across 5 countries over money Scott used for 2023 election. Tiri kuona nhauwa yacho itoripo yangetwa parliament. But tiri kuona ZDF pay a tribute to senior chaplain. Tiri kuona panapa align ya president ya vice president Crush Chiwenga yakashaika iyi muri yeZimbabwe. Ana Thomas Mapfumo nhauwa dzavo ndofunga muri kudziona dziripo. So tiri kuona panapa tiri kuti tiende kune nhauwa yacho iyoyo ye 150 million tione kuti zvakamira sei yakaspendwa nana Scott sakupwanya kuti vange vari vanohwina maelection. Ndofunga tiri kuona nhauwa dzacho dziri apa idzi muri yeZimbabwe. Rege dzeti try kuvhura tione kuti panovhurika here kana kuti kwete. Rege dzaiti dai so tuone kuti zvakamira sei panapa. Tiri kuona pane mashoko ari kunyorwa akasiyana siyana muri yeZimbabwe ari kutaurwa kuti regedzai tione panapa chiko chiri kuitika panapa. Mazi advert aya ari kutivhiringidza kuti tinge tichiverenga. Tiri kuona panapa ZimI, an international illegal battle involving court proceeding, worldwide freezing orders and related financial document encompassing well over 150 million years turned attention towards Zimbabwe businessman Scott Sakupkhanya kudata Grey Finance Ministry Permanent Secretary George Guamatanga and two members of the Presidium who names feature in recorded conversation disclosed during the wide dispatch. Tiri kuona panapa muri yeZimbabwe that record yacho ndoiri kumusoroko yatataura kuti hatikwanisi kuisa togonozorwa nemacopyright because ndine mamwe andakamboisa ndakarwa nemacopyright mazi audios iyo vava muri yeZimbabwe. So ndosaka ndisina kuda kumaisa. So
Dental, it was language that I now believe was crafted to reassure the public, to sort of calm any speculation that was lingering around at that time. And they wanted to give this projection of him, of giving an image of a leader who is kind of guided by constitutional principle. That is all what we can read, from that. But then if you fast forward to this past weekend, you could see that, there's a total flip of the script, complete turnaround, right? The same guy who said, I will persuade the persuaders not to persuade me, he's the one who ended up congratulating the same persuaders for passing CAP 3. Those that he had said, they are the persuaders, so I'm going to persuade them not to persuade me. But last weekend, we saw him congratulating them for passing the amendment, for giving the amendment thumbs up with a 2/3 majority in both houses. And we all know that, that amendment, we have all been critical, and we've all been pointing out to this reality. Yekuti, this was a politically engineered, divisive, and strategically timed thing. Timed because he knew 2027 was coming. And with the 2027, the significance of 2027, ladies and gentlemen, is that is the period where ZANU-PF have to do their elective congress, choose a new leader, because this guy would have served, his 2 terms. So this is why I'm saying it was strategically timed. I think we've gone, over this, but Zogorene Simba anyway. And whatever it is that, he intended, to do, whatever it is that, he tried, to do at that particular moment in time, him passing himself as a constitutionalist, but all of a sudden now, that constitutionalist, rhetoric has suddenly evaporated. It is no longer there. And at the weekend, he replaced that by celebration of a process that we've all been arguing is undermining the very principles that he himself claimed to defend. So to me, that was, rhetoric in the beginning. But the actions that we witnessed this past, weekend can lead us to conclude, something else. To say Kuti he was in it all along. I don't know if there were any people that ever believed him when he was saying that I'm a constitutionalist. Remember, this guy, the way that he tried to be the president of Zimbabwe. Remember the 2004 Cholocho, declaration. He's been trying for a minute, only for him to succeed in 2017. And do you honestly believe that this was going to be a two-term president? How many bodies has he walked over for him to get to where he is, today? But one thing, I think us as Zimbabweans, there's this thing that we need to be woke. Because if you are looking at what he said back then and what he's saying, that contradiction, ladies and gentlemen, it is not a subtle, contradiction. Maybe he thought that, it's something, that was going to be hidden or something that was going to be ambiguous. But no, if you want to look at it analytically, critically, you can see, Kuti, whatever it is that has happened here is a direct collusion between political messaging and political action. And this is what politicians are very good at. And all politicians are guilty of this. Because if you want to look at the collusion, it tells us something that is very important. Because earlier on, he was using a constitutional language. And him using that constitutional language was kind of strategic. It was not sincere. It was for him and for those who actually understand some of these things. They can relegate that to just political, theater, a performance being done by somebody, an action, an acting being done by somebody who is trying to manage optics. And there was not even any commitment to guide, his behavior. It's just unfortunate that we are in an environment where executive power is dominating and is always, dominated. And under those environments, this kind of strategic ambiguity is common with people like Emerson Mnangagwa. They speak, they talk to you about one thing in terms of constitutionalism, and they can only do that when it is convenient for them. They can only do that when they know that this is going to be buy me time. They can only do that when they know could they want to reduce any resistance. Remember, within the internal politics of ZANU-PF, there was something, or there is still something that is, brewing. So, wanting to be keeping, these factions, calm, you would see a leader like him using constitutional language. Because it is convenient for them. It helps to buy time. And it deals with aspect of resistance from within. But when we get to the time that the real political objective arrives, which in this case was CAP 3. That rhetoric immediately evaporated. It was no longer there. And the agenda that Mnangagwa had from the beginning became invisible. It became invisible. So, what does this mean for Zimbabwe? What does this mean for us as Zimbabweans? When we get these political statements that collide, we must be in a position to be evaluating the political statements as they are being, spoken. You must evaluate them. We must not even start to talk about or to to get to a point whereby we want to be reassured by the sounding of that rhetoric. But we need to be people who think deeper. I know there are people that say kuti zvamuda kutaura izvo kuti izvo ningi vanhu must be critical, must be G. That doesn't exist mune vanhu because vanhu vanongoti chero zvazvaita. But if it is voter education, political education, we need to get our people to understand that sometimes when these leaders speak, don't take their word for it. Look beyond the words because there's a message hidden that is there. There's a message that will be, hidden. We cannot take the constitutional language at face value, especially with what happened with the Chabangus of this world, because there was a political incentives that was pointing in another direction. We have said CAP 3 is not just a legal amendment, but CAP 3, it was designed to show you how power operates behind the curtain, beyond the speeches, beyond the press conferences, and beyond the carefully crafted messages that are spoken in the public, at rallies, at press conferences, and at every fora that is designed to get people to listen and consume a political message. I want you to keep, this tension in mind. Because I spoke about this tension in terms of Emmerson Mnangagwa. But I want to take that tension to the opposition. Allow me to take it to the opposition. Because if we want to be honest about any conversation about the future of Zimbabwe, we must be people who are prepared to look at both the opposition and the ruling party and consider their contradictions. Both of these, entities. It is important that we do that. Because if you want to look at the opposition side, one of the biggest issues right now is the widening gap. That is, the gap that is widening between what the opposition in Zimbabwe has been promising and what that opposition in Zimbabwe delivers in terms of them being visible, in terms of them bringing about transformation or transformative, action. Because in Zimbabwe, we've known for years, our opposition has positioned itself as an alternative. Time and time again, they've spoken to us, talking to us, telling us that they are a force to be reckoned with, a force that will bring a better Zimbabwe, a more accountable government, and a more democratic society. This has been the language of opposition movements in Zimbabwe. And it is the language that has resonated with millions of people who were tired, frustrated, and desperate for real change to happen in Zimbabwe. But here's the challenge. There's a challenge. Because when you make promises, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that you have to understand and one thing that you have to know in real life, promises are very loud. A promise is very loud, but when it comes to the action is faint. The rhetoric that comes from the opposition is very powerful, but when it comes to the strategy, it is not clear. All you get given is hope. And that hope that they ask people to hold on to is not being matched by anything to do with organizational discipline, organizational unity, or any political groundwork that needs to be done to turn that hope into reality. You get told there's something that is happening on the ground. I wonder which ground is that? Is it a ground, that is in Mars? I don't know. I've tried asking people, hey, what is happening? I've gone to Sunningdale, speak to folks, on the ground. Hey, what's happening in Kong? They'll tell you nothing is happening here. But the language is there's political groundwork that is happening. And you're being asked to hope. Hold on to the hope. But if the hope is not being made by these three things that I've spoken about, that needs to be in place, that are needed to turn the hope into reality, what do you think happens? Change no etik. Because on one hand, you're having this opposition that is preaching peace, stability, and a new political culture. We have had this flowery, language, the language that speaks about the notions of non-violence, the language that, speaks to the notions of constitutionalism and national, healing. And these are important values. If you don't, subscribe to these values, you are dead as a dodo. These are the values that Zimbabwe desperately needs. And we need these values to underpin our existence. But then again, on one hand, if you have the same actors that are putting out these narratives, that on one hand, they're putting these narratives, And then on the other hand, the same actors are revealing deep disagreements, internal fractures, and competing centers of authority. We are only left with visuals of statements that are contradictory to each other. Us as the public, that is all we are only left with. We are only left with visuals of leaders who are trying to be dominating another leader, or or leaders who are trying to be challenging another leader. Those are the visuals that we end up seeing. And we begin to see alliances that are mushrooming, alliances that are coming into existence, and these alliances causing a shift without any explanation whatsoever. All you are left with as the people who wish for a strong opposition is a gossip. Oh, so and so did this. Oh, so and so akazonzwa why. Or so and so this. Or this one is a sellout. Or this one here, he saw the struggle. Oh, that one was bought. Those are the explanations that you end up being occupied with. But they are explanations that are not supported by any evidence. But the thing with such statements is they're believable when they are being spoken by somebody, but when somebody is speaking, the same thing that is more or less the same in terms of this selling out, nobody believes you. People start to say, where is the evidence? Bring the evidence. But on one side, you're not calling for the evidence. But on one side, you're calling for the evidence. That can only create confusion. It can only create doubt, and it creates a credibility gap that can be difficult to fill. Because you cannot preach unity on one hand, but on the other hand, your actions are displaying disunity. You cannot promise a better Zimbabwe while struggling to put together, to organize a better opposition. You cannot ask the people of Zimbabwe to keep hoping when the visible actions do not show a pathway to achieving the hope. Those things, ladies and gentlemen, they will not get us anywhere. We will not succeed. We will not get anywhere as a people. So when you're looking at these things, and people often want to understand what then is in store for us. What are the strategies that are there to navigate this political landscape that is mad with all these things that I'm talking about? Because the events of the past year or so, the events of the past year, they need to be understood by anyone who's very good at analyzing political behavior. Because we've been watching both landscapes, political landscape, one can easily argue and say what ZANU-PF have been doing was a way of consolidating power through the constitutional amendments. And that is exactly what, they've been doing. And when they see the opposition, ZANU-PF is busy, doing this. I'm not saying, it is a good thing that, they were doing. Because that consolidation of, power through those, and that constitutional amendment, which is unconstitutional anyway, it is leading us down a path that we should never, ever go down or follow. But at the same time, this is happening in the ruling party. And you think that this is the moment. This is where true opposition leadership is supposed to stand up and be counted. This is where true opposition leadership is supposed to be standing up and consolidate